everyone, and welcome back to the Lair. Today we're going to be talking about what you should consider when running the first session of a brand new campaign. It's a subject that has a lot of importance in our hobby, and it's something that I see Dungeon Masters time and time again not consider properly. The first session is pivotal, especially when you have a table of new players who haven't played with you before. It's a session where you have the opportunity to show people what you are capable of as a Dungeon Master and how your campaigns will be if they decide to invest in them. Some people may disagree, but if the first session isn't good, the rest of the campaign isn't going to likely be much better. For those of you who are interested in continuing to grow as Dungeon Masters, I'm sure you're going to be able to gain quite a bit from this video. So let's discuss the things you can consider when running your first session. I think knowing the fundamentals is very important. For me, it's all about having my session well prepared and ready to use. Having lists for random NPCs and charts for random encounters, as well as locations and treasure. It's all about me being able to roll with the punches, especially as a sandbox dungeon master, and be able to weave together the player's story into a coherent adventure. I think a strong introduction is key. By this, I mean striking the iron whilst it's hot. The worst thing I think a Dungeon Master can do is have a slow introduction, where the players have to slowly get involved in play. I personally like using hot starts, where the campaign begins with a combat encounter. It allows your players to just immediately start rolling dice, make decisions, and actually work together as a team. The encounter shouldn't be very difficult, but it should be challenging enough that each player gets to at least have one action each, one turn each, so they can show off their characters, roll some dice, and show off their abilities. You can use whatever enemies you want for this encounter. I typically use things like goblins and kobolds, or bandits. But I think the encounter should be tied into one of the plot points, one of the adventure hooks that you have in the local region, whether it's a group of highwaymen or a goblin nest in a nearby cave, something like that, you know? There's nothing I dislike more than an awkward roleplay encounter around the table at the start of a new campaign. Obviously, it is a bit of a trope to start a campaign in a tavern, and sometimes the players can really kill it and make it a cool intro, but usually it falls pretty flat on its face, and it doesn't really offer your players the excitement or dopamine that they were looking for when actually joining your game. If you're not going to go with a hot start, I recommend doing a very quick 5-minute narrative, kind of explaining the backdrop for the adventure that they're going to be starting on, and actually have them start the session at the quest location. So maybe it's the Forgotten Temple, maybe it's the dungeon or ruin or cave that they're here to investigate and potentially clear. This works super well if the adventure is in one of these kind of locations, because you can just have the party arrive outside and then they can get straight into exploring, rolling dice, role-playing, and searching for treasure. And this is what most players want to do, whether they are an old school player or a new school player. There's huge differences between the different kind of groups of players, but that's not one of them. It's best to avoid any kind of long narrative introductions. I've seen games where Dungeon Masters feel the need to explain everything in their world, to discuss wars, eras, factions, and religions that in no way are relevant to what's going on with the players, with what the players want, right? I think if newer Dungeon Masters could learn anything from this video, it would be that less narrative is the best narrative. If your players want to know something, they should ask you. Because at least in that situation, the players actually care what you say about a subject. What should really matter is the local geopolitics, in my opinion, especially in the main play area, such as like a local town or a barony or a county. But even information like that should be on a need-to-know basis. You shouldn't be telling everybody, like, what the Lord's family are called, or what they're dealing with right now is dynastic disputes. This is stuff that they should learn. This is stuff that they should investigate. This is stuff that they should know on a need-to-know basis. You know, some DMs really do just like hearing the sound of their own voice, and they just want to talk to you non-stop about their worlds. And I mean, pardon me, there isn't really anything wrong with that. It's just a lot of players don't really give a shit, and it can be kind of annoying, you know? A lot of DMs do this at the start of a new campaign to try and hype up the players. I think that's the main reason why they do it. But if the actual sessions are slow, boring, or lack the fundamentals, it's just going to end up being kind of deflating for the players. I think some people are surprised when they join my games that I don't sit and explain everything about my campaign setting and my world to them. But I'm not really trying to sell you on my campaign setting or my world. I'm trying to sell you on my DMing. And there's a lot more to running a game than being able to talk for 3, 4, 5 hours about your homebrew world or setting. And I know that might sound kind of crazy to have to sell yourself to your players, but games crash and burn so often these days that actually keeping a group of players together for longer than 6 months is a pretty big achievement, unless you're playing with a group of close friends. In regards to player knowledge, if you're concerned that your players may need to know some information for a relative purpose, it's not a bad idea for you to create a small cheat sheet for them before the session where you list some bullet points of things that they would know. This is what I do for players, and I think they appreciate the fact that it doesn't waste any session time, and they can actually refer to the information wherever they need to without having to ask me in session and seem like they don't actually know anything as players. I think players like to think that they know what they're talking about, but for you to be able to create sheets like that, you need to know what you're talking about. It's important for you to have a keen understanding of the world that you're running, whether it's a module like Keep on the Borderlands, or something customly crafted by you, a homebrew world of your own design. With a module, make sure you read the book proactively and absorb as much knowledge about the setting, the adventures, the NPCs, and the monsters as you can. The more you know, the better your game will appear, because you'll be a lot more confident running it. With your own homebrew world, knowledge on your game should be built up and developed slowly. I personally believe less is more when it comes to homebrew settings, and you can definitely run a big world. I just think it's important to be able to delay gratification and not expect to have a huge detailed world within a couple of weeks of world building. Great settings take months, if not years, of development to create, but you can have, in my opinion, a great setting within a few days or a few weeks of world building if you focus on a smaller region. At least that way, you're not going to get burnt out and you're actually going to feel rewarded based on what you're making. Most players get paralyzed by choice in a big campaign world anyway, with so many options of different places to visit and kingdoms to see. So I think it's just better to start small and grow your world over time and focus all of your creative efforts into that. My campaign setting that I'm running currently for my Wednesday and Saturday campaigns started with 1 barony. Now it's like 10 kingdoms, multiple continents, dozens of cultures. And I think it's okay to think big and begin to lay down plot threads to weave together larger stories. But I just don't think it's something that needs to be done very, very quickly. I like having my villains already pre-designed as well, so I can begin to lay down groundwork for them as the story progresses. I used to be quite a long-term, delayed gratification storyteller. Quite different from how I world build, obviously, but I think, especially with the current generation of players, there is a lot more value in having episodic villains and recurring villains, a bit like in Star Trek. At least by using different villains for different adventures, you can continue to pay off the player's investment and you can actually build up the story to a much more grander purpose. The reason I say all of this is because it's rare that a campaign lasts 6 months these days, like I said earlier. So if games aren't going to be long-term as standard, maybe campaigns and adventures shouldn't be either. You can obviously have multiple parts to a campaign, just like how modern modules have like levels 1 to 4. It's a certain adventure campaign. And then the next 4 levels is the next one. And there was also how obviously they did it in the 80s as well, with kind of campaign paths, adventure paths, where you would go from one adventure to another adventure to another adventure. I personally think that is the right way to run your games. I don't think you should be trying to make a huge overarching campaign with a start, middle, and end, where the start is level 1 and the end is level 10. I just think it's a little bit too excessive, and I don't see that many campaigns actually last that long for players to actually see the end. And I think that's what more players should see. I think they should see the end of campaigns. They should actually be able to defeat the big bad and win or lose, you know, obviously, or lose. I think that could be really interesting too. But yeah. And I think this is a great opportunity to kind of lean into pacing. And I think pacing is also very important. I find that a lot of people don't consider it when running their games, but it's basically the idea of, I'd like my players to be at this point in the story by the end of the session. I know it's not always easy to push your players forward, and sometimes you'll misrepresent how long it will take for you and your players to get from point A in your campaign world to point B. But I think having a pace of the game in the back of your head is always going to be better than not having a pace at all, if that makes sense. It will allow you to know when you should give your players a bit of a break, let them take things a little bit more slowly, and when they are going to need a little bit of a push. Debating who should lead the party down the corridor is not a conversation that should take 10 minutes, just as an example. And if you're playing at a table that enjoys debating lots of things and creating long, detailed plans, and you enjoy that too, then fair enough. But I think it's very important to understand the types of players that you have at your table, so you can best entertain them at your sessions. And I think this, relatively speaking, covers what I believe you should consider when running your first session. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I'd love to hear what you guys consider when running your first session, and whether anything discussed today has really stuck out to you. What are your thoughts on long-term versus short-term storytelling? What are the fundamentals that you consider and always prepare in your campaigns? And do you prefer running settings with provincial or kingdom scale, that's either 1 mile hexes or 6 mile hexes? Or do you prefer running settings with continental scale, which is 24 mile, right? Like, he doesn't know everything, right? But with kingdoms, empires, and continents. Oh god. Yeah, I've not been very well recently, I do apologise. I'm still kind of recovering. Let me know in the comments section below. Also consider joining our public Discord, where we run one-shots, create and discuss homebrew, and talk about all sorts of D&D, TTRPG related subjects. Finally, consider supporting the channel by becoming a patron. You'll find a variety of charts, tables, and systems on there which you can use for your own games. See you guys next time on Loki's Lair. Until then.